The moment Meghan McCain took her seat across from Denzel Washington, the tension was already thick enough to snap. The studio lights didn't warm the room, they exposed it. The producers of the special segment, titled Patriotism, Personal or Political, probably expected fireworks. But what they got was thunder. Meghan straightened her posture, lips pressed into a smirk, voice calm but calculated. "You speak of struggle, Denzel. But my family has sacrificed more for this country than most could comprehend." Denzel blinked once. Slowly. The camera caught it all, his silence wasn't hesitation. It was restraint. The kind that warned of a storm gathering just below the surface. "Sacrifice," he repeated, his tone razor-thin. "You sell sacrifice on book tours and talk shows." The audience froze. Meghan's face twitched, just a flicker, but Denzel didn't flinch. "Your father was a soldier," he continued, voice low. "He bled. I bled. My brothers died. But you," he leaned forward, locking eyes. "You built a brand." Gasps rippled through the room. A crew member dropped a pen behind the camera. Nobody moved to pick it up. Meghan leaned forward now, voice tightening. "Excuse me, are you suggesting I haven't earned my place here?" Denzel smiled. But it wasn't a friendly smile, it was the kind forged in fire. "I'm saying you inherited the mic and forgot who paid for the frequency." A beat of silence. And then the host jumped in, too late, too soft, to steer the segment. But it was out of control now. "This isn't about left or right," Denzel added, cutting through the noise. "This is about pain. Real pain. And the people who think they can wear it like a designer jacket." Meghan looked directly at the camera, clearly switching gears. "Let's not pretend Hollywood hasn't monetized struggle." Denzel's jaw flexed, but his voice stayed calm. "Difference is, I didn't monetize it. I survived it. You built a podcast." The crowd didn't know whether to applaud or hold their breath. Meghan's face was still, but her hands betrayed her, clenched under the table. And just like that, the first strike had landed. The stage wasn't for policy anymore. It was war for truth. The moderator's voice trembled as she tried to regain control of the conversation. "Let's bring it back to unity," she said. But the room had already split down an invisible fault line, between experience and performance. Meghan crossed her arms, eyes cold. "I didn't choose the spotlight, Mr. Washington. I was born into it. But I've used it to advocate for veterans, for families broken by war, for—" "No," Denzel cut in sharply. "You used it to market grief. And somewhere along the way, you convinced yourself that speaking about pain was the same as living through it." Meghan's eyes narrowed, but he wasn't done. "You think proximity to suffering gives you authority. But there's a difference between standing next to the fire and being burned by it." The audience let out a low murmur. The energy in the studio had shifted completely. What started as a panel had become a courtroom, and Denzel wasn't just testifying, he was prosecuting. Meghan's voice dropped an octave. "How dare you diminish what my family has given to this country?" Denzel leaned in again, slow and deliberate. "I'm not diminishing your father's service. I honor it. But I will not let you use his wounds as your shield. Pain is not a slogan. And patriotism is not inherited, it's proven." Even the host stayed silent. Meghan drew a deep breath. Her voice now brittle with frustration. "You think I haven't suffered? You don't know what it's like to lose a father in the public eye. To have your grief dissected by every outlet in America." Denzel nodded, finally. But not in sympathy, in confirmation. "You're right. I don't know that pain. But I do know what it's like to bury someone quietly, without a nation watching. And I never used their names to buy applause." Her face flushed with a mix of fury and disbelief. The camera zoomed in, catching everything: Denzel's steady eyes, Meghan's shaking hands, the way the audience leaned in like they were afraid to blink. This wasn't just television. It was raw, unfiltered confrontation. And it had just begun. There was a crackling silence in the studio, the kind that only comes when two forces refuse to yield. Meghan took a long breath, clearly trying to recover control, not just of her tone, but of the entire narrative. "I don't think anyone should have to prove their patriotism, Denzel," she said, voice coated with civility. "Especially when their family's blood is already on the line." Denzel didn't blink. "And yet here you are," he replied, using that blood like a business card. The audience stirred, no laughter, no applause, just the unmistakable weight of discomfort. Denzel wasn't aiming to entertain. He was exposing something deeper, something many felt but few dared to articulate. "You walk into every studio with a last name that shields you," he continued. "You're invited not for what you've endured, but for what others did before you. That's not legacy. That's insulation." Meghan tried to speak, but he raised his hand, not to silence her, but to finish a thought that had clearly been building for years. "Grief doesn't make you untouchable. And it doesn't make you right. It makes you human. But when you start selling it, that's when it becomes something else." The camera panned to Meghan's face, her jaw clenched, her eyes glistening, not with tears, but with restrained outrage. "So what are you saying?" she asked, bitter. "That I should just sit down and shut up?" Denzel's voice dropped to almost a whisper, but its sharpness cut like glass. "I'm saying maybe it's time you listened instead of led. Because right now, you're not helping the broken, you're branding them." The moderator shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly unsure whether to intervene or let the moment ride out. The producers backstage were frozen. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was reckoning. And across America, millions were watching, some nodding, some shaking their heads, but none of them able to look away. This was no longer just a talk show segment. It was a collision between truth and projection. And the fallout was only just beginning. The moderator attempted to mediate, leaning forward with a hand raised, as if she could slow the waves crashing across the stage. "Maybe we can shift to solutions, what unites us instead of divides." "No," Denzel interrupted calmly, but firmly. "We don't get to skip to healing until we stop mislabeling the wound." The audience froze. Meghan's nostrils flared. "You think you're the only one who can define pain?" she fired back. "You think your experience makes you the authority on everyone else's?" Denzel didn't flinch. "No," he said. "But I do know when pain is being used as currency." He stood up, not storming, but slow and composed, his presence expanding with every step toward center stage. "You don't own the pain, Meghan," he said, voice deep and steady. "You narrate it, commodify it, and turn it into a political prop. That's not empathy. That's exploitation." The audience gasped. Cameras shifted to Meghan, whose expression was locked in a silent rage. "I've sat with mothers who buried sons the government forgot," Denzel continued. "I've seen veterans die homeless while being used as symbols on campaign posters. And what did you do? #support and photo ops in front of flags." Meghan leaned forward, gripping the arms of her chair. "You're out of line." Denzel tilted his head, eyes locked on hers. Out of line would be letting this performance go unchecked. For a full 5 seconds, there was no sound except for the hum of the studio lights. Viewers across the country sat at the edge of their seats, no remote, no phone, just breath held. And then Denzel turned slightly toward the crowd. "You want unity? Start by telling the truth. Not the version that sells. The version that hurts." He sat down slowly, as if the weight of that sentence had to land before anything else moved. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was sacred. Because for the first time that night, the performance cracked, and the truth poured out. Meghan adjusted her blazer-like armor, her voice sharpening as she regained composure. "You're accusing me of selling patriotism, Denzel? My family gave everything to this country." Denzel nodded slowly. "And I honor that," he said. "But honoring sacrifice isn't the same as monetizing it." The moderator looked like she might jump in again, but Denzel leaned forward, eyes unblinking. "This country isn't a brand," he said. It's not a set you perform on or a product to promote. But that's how some treat it. You can't trademark patriotism and slap it on mugs and speeches and expect to own the conversation. Meghan's lips tightened. She wanted to cut him off, but he continued, measured, controlled, undeniable. When I speak about injustice, I'm not doing it for ratings or legacy. I do it because I've seen people forgotten. Left behind. Dismissed by the very people who claim to love this country the most. He looked at her, then at the camera. If your love for this country means denying its flaws, then it's not love. It's denial dressed up in red, white, and blue. The audience responded with murmurs of agreement. Some were visibly shaken, others nodded, like they'd been waiting for someone to say it out loud. Meghan raised her hand in frustration. So what, Denzel? Are we just supposed to focus on the bad? Tear down everything people fought for? No, he replied. But if you build a statue on lies, don't call it history. That line hit hard. Not just for Meghan, but for everyone in the studio. Truth doesn't destroy legacy, he added. It redeems it. A slow, respectful silence followed. The kind that held space for gravity, not applause. The flag doesn't belong to one party. Neither does pain. And it damn sure doesn't belong to those who think grief makes them gatekeepers of what matters. The air thickened with weight. No one dared cut to commercial. Meghan leaned forward, her jaw set tight, the lights above catching the sharp edges of her expression. You think you know my grief, she said, voice trembling, but not with sadness. With fury. You stand up there, lecturing me about sacrifice like I haven't lived it. My father was a prisoner of war. A senator. A man who... Denzel raised a hand, palm open. Not to dismiss. But to pause. Meghan, no one's questioning your father's service, he said softly. But you didn't go to war, he did. You didn't get tortured in a cell, you sat in a studio. The gasp from the audience was audible, sharp, immediate. Meghan blinked fast, the sting of that line catching her off guard. Denzel didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He leaned in, closer than before, and his voice dropped to a level that demanded stillness. Your grief is real. I'm not here to belittle it. But it doesn't give you license to silence others. It doesn't give you ownership over struggle. He gestured broadly to the room. Every person here has carried something heavy. Loss. Pain. Fear. But most of them don't get a seat at this table. You do. So what you say here? It echoes. Meghan tried to fire back, but Denzel kept going. When you say things like real Americans or true patriots, what you really mean is people who agree with me. That's not unity. That's branding. And you've used your grief, your last name, as a stamp of approval to shut down conversation. He sat back, eyes never leaving hers. That's not honoring your father. That's hiding behind him. For a moment, the studio was silent again, too charged for applause, too tense for interruption. Even the moderator had backed off, surrendering to the current of the exchange. Meghan looked around the room. Her shoulders had tensed, her mouth tight like a lock that wouldn't open. She was cornered, not by aggression, but by truth spoken without fear. And let me say this, Denzel added, voice sharpening. You can't weaponize grief and then cry foul when someone defends themselves. You brought it to the debate. You made it political. That's on you. He turned to the audience, letting his words find their mark. Pain is not a pass. It's a responsibility. And if you're going to wield it like a sword, expect people to call out where you swing it. And that was the moment everyone felt it. The emotional playing field had shifted. The silence wasn't for respect this time. It was surrender. Meghan's voice cracked as she leaned toward her mic, forcing control over every syllable. I've never claimed to be a victim, Denzel. But I won't sit here and let you question my integrity because I speak from experience. Denzel didn't flinch. His elbows rested on the table, fingers intertwined, as if he were waiting for her to finish, not with impatience, but with gravity. You're not a victim, he said. You're a brand. The studio inhaled sharply. You've turned your personal loss into a platform. And that's your right. But let's be honest about what it is. You don't speak from pain, you speak through packaging. That's different. He pointed, not at her, but at the screen behind them where clips of her past statements played during the intro. You've gone on air talking about how others milk tragedy. But you wrote a book about your grief. You sell speeches with a price tag. You leveraged sorrow into spotlight. Meghan's eyes flashed. You think I asked for this attention? No, Denzel replied. But you never turned it down. His voice never rose. That was what made it land harder. There was no yelling. Just sharp-edged truth delivered like a scalpel instead of a hammer. The problem isn't your pain, Meghan, he continued. It's the way you've used it to invalidate anyone who doesn't fit your mold of American suffering. He turned slightly, addressing not just her, but every lens aimed at him. When people from the south side of Chicago talk about police violence, you call it complaining. When immigrants speak of separation, you call it drama. When veterans who disagree with you speak up, you question their loyalty. He leaned in again. You've turned pain into product, and then tried to gatekeep who gets to hurt loud. Meghan, visibly rattled, tried to interject. You don't know me. Denzel nodded. You're right. I don't. But I know the playbook. He let that hang. And it's time someone ripped a few pages out. The studio, unsure of whether to cheer or hold its breath, stayed locked in silence. The moderator looked stunned. Cameramen exchanged glances like they were capturing history in real time. Because if grief is currency, you're not broke, he concluded. But some people still pay in silence, and they're never invited to this table. It wasn't an insult. It was an indictment. And it stuck. Meghan squared her shoulders, her voice now cutting through the studio like glass. I may be a brand to you, Denzel, but I've stood for this country since the day I could speak. You don't get to lecture me on patriotism. Denzel leaned back, slowly exhaling, then spoke with deliberate clarity. I'm not lecturing you on patriotism. I'm reminding you, you don't own it. The words landed like a gavel. Final. Precise. Loving your country doesn't mean controlling the narrative of who gets to be heard, or who gets to be angry. You wave the flag like it's a backstage pass, like you're the bouncer deciding who gets in. He turned slightly toward the audience. But patriotism isn't a family heirloom. It's not passed down by last name. It's earned every time someone speaks truth to power, especially when it's unpopular. Meghan fired back, her tone hardening. So what? I'm not allowed to be proud of my family. My father's name is a legacy. It is, Denzel replied. But legacy shouldn't be a muzzle. And right now, you're using it to silence criticism, not spark conversation. He paused just long enough for the weight to settle. You don't get to tell people when their pain is valid. You don't get to decide when the conversation ends. You don't get to say, I support the troops and then dismiss the ones who disagree with you. That's not patriotism. That's performance. A single damn slipped out from someone in the crowd. The cameras caught it. Twitter would catch it next. Meghan opened her mouth, but Denzel cut gently across her hesitation, not rudely, but with unshakable purpose. You say you love America? Then love all of it. Not just the parts that make you look noble. Not just the wars your family fought. Love the protests. Love the cries for justice. Love the contradictions, because that's where the real work lives. He pointed to the camera. Because if your version of patriotism only shows up for applause, it's not love. It's branding. And you don't get to stamp that on everyone else's pain. The moderator finally stepped in, face pale, voice tight. We need to go to a break. But everyone knew, the real break had already happened. And it was televised. As the cameras returned from break, a quiet tension still hovered. The host's voice trembled slightly as he welcomed the audience back, but it was clear, everyone was here for them. Meghan, composed but visibly bristling, wasted no time. You act like I'm trying to censor people. I'm not. I just believe in respecting the institutions that hold this country together. Denzel's reply came with calm steel. Respecting institutions is easy, until those institutions fail someone you love. He let that linger. You know what I find fascinating? The people who yell the loudest about law and order are often the first to justify when those same laws break the backs of the voiceless. Meghan's tone grew icy. You're twisting my words. I believe in accountability. Only when it fits your framework, Denzel said. You want order without justice. Patriotism without questions. Flags without flaws. That's not unity. That's erasure. The moderator sat frozen, notes untouched, like a referee who'd lost control of the game. Denzel turned again to the crowd. There are millions of Americans who love this country but have never felt it love them back. And every time they speak up, they're told to be quiet, called ungrateful, divisive, or un-American. He faced Meghan squarely. But when you use your platform to shut those voices down, not with facts, but with emotional guilt, you're not defending the country. You're weaponizing its image. Meghan leaned in, her voice sharper now. I've never silenced anyone. I've just asked for respect. No, Denzel said firmly. You've demanded silence. There's a difference. He delivered the final blow with haunting restraint. Your version of patriotism only accepts polished pain. Clean suffering. Stories that end in medals and memoirs. But there's beauty in the raw, in the messy, in the inconvenient truths. That's where real change begins. Silence swallowed the studio again, not the silence of awkwardness, but the kind that follows something that couldn't be unsaid. Even Meghan, fiercely articulate all evening, blinked slowly, no rebuttal surfacing. Denzel added one last thought. When you say, God bless America, make sure you mean all of it. Even the parts that don't make it into your speeches. And with that, he leaned back, unshaken, unmoved, and undeniably heard. The final minutes of the segment were meant to be a cooldown, a return to civility. But the air had shifted. What had started as political theater had turned into something else, a reckoning. The moderator, still shaken, attempted to reset. Let's close with final thoughts. Meghan? She gathered herself, straightened the papers in front of her more out of habit than necessity, and forced a tight smile. I don't regret being passionate. I love this country. I always will. And I just wish, we could love it together again. It was a careful answer, rehearsed and safe. The crowd offered polite applause. Then the host turned to Denzel. No papers. No teleprompter. Just eyes, voice, and conviction. I don't doubt your love for this country, he said softly to Meghan. But we can't build unity on half the truth. He scanned the room, not for approval, but for connection. America isn't broken because people are angry. It's broken because we've been told anger is unpatriotic. That if you cry out from the margins, you're somehow less American. But the truth? The truth isn't loud. It doesn't have to be. It just is. The light softened slightly as the camera zoomed in. Denzel's face was lit not by spotlight, but by stillness. You said you want to love this country together again. Good. Then start by listening to the parts of it that have been muted. Don't fear their rage, fear their silence. The crowd sat in stunned stillness. Denzel's final words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. Patriotism is not performance. It's presence. And when you show up, really show up, you don't get to choose which parts of the country are worthy of love. You love it all. Or not at all. Fade to black. Then came the thunder. The internet exploded within minutes. Clips were trending. Hashtag Denzel Truth and hashtag McCain vs. Washington rocketed up the charts. Pundits debated, fans rallied, critics raged. But through it all, one quote reigned supreme, looping across feeds and captions. The truth wasn't loud. It was clear. And for once, that was enough. You just witnessed a clash not of volume, but of values. In a world where shouting often replaces substance, Denzel reminded us, clarity cuts deeper than noise. If this story shook something in you, hit like, drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. This is CB Stories, where truth isn't whispered, it's told.